Hi, my name is Jenny Castle, and I'm the Gallery and Programs Director at the Rose Center for the Arts at Lower Columbia College. I'm here with Eddie Lanieri, who is a photographic artist and an instructor at Xavier of Louisiana. Eddie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my work and talk about my work with the students and so they can hear somebody from the South talk about their work. So thank you.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you here. To start the interview, I would like you to talk a little bit about your background and your path to becoming an artist. Can you share that with the students?
Sure. I will tell you that my first introduction to photography was when I was in 8th grade. I'd received a Polaroid camera, and this was back in the 80s. So we didn't have cell phones, and we went on a trip to Washington D.C. and I became I just started documenting, and I just fell in love with that idea of documenting. And I had my music teacher. She was so impressed by the photographs that she actually gave me a mini exhibition in our middle school, and I think that was the bug. That was the bug that got me. But I come from an immigrant family. My family's from Italy, and I come from a very blue collar family. Both my parents are nurses. So they didn't really have, when I was like, well, I want to go to art school, they were like, so it wasn't that it was not supported. It was just, they didn't have a map or sort of a compass. They just didn't have any reference for that. So I wound up going to school. I sort of found a compromise. I wound up going to school at Arizona State because I was able to study photography there. But my undergraduate, and in retrospect now, I really see how the work that I'm doing or the way I'm thinking about my photography now really does reference my background in archaeology. So I went to Arizona State because they have a really great photography program. They have a really phenomenal anthropology and archaeology program. And, the idea of using material culture, the past, fragments of the past, to reconstruct an identity of something that's no longer around. I mean, that's forefront in my work. So, 20 plus years later, that still sits in my work, which is interesting because sometimes when it's happening, you don't see it. But after that, I didn't go immediately to graduate school, and I would always suggest that, like, don't go straight into graduate school. Go have some fun in your life, or go make some artwork. And that's what I did. I really wanted to work on honing in, sort of, and I wasn't ready for graduate school. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I was in my 20s and I needed to get the wild out before life happened. So I moved over to Italy for several years and just, kept my camera by my side and photographed. I moved back home to New York City after grad school, and I thought, this is going to happen. I'm back in New York City. Like, all of it, I was going to everything was going to open up. And instead, I was hustling my hustle for my hustle. Like, it was overbearing, the economic strain of living in New York City and the constant movement. My artwork just went straight to the side because I was just trying to survive. And I got the opportunity to come to Louisiana, to come to New Orleans to teach. And I will personally, I find that my work, this is where my voice opened up. Like, I found like I was able to find my voice in New Orleans. Louisiana, like the essence of Louisiana, are very much part of my work now. I even say I'm more of a New Orleanian than I am a New Yorker at this point.
And you said, we were speaking earlier, and you said you've lived in New Orleans for about 10 years now?
13 years.
13 years. 13 years.
I've been teaching at Xavier for 10 years. But I've been living in New Orleans for 13.
Okay. So yeah, it's become a new home. You've been in a place that long.
Yeah.
Well, when you were talking about your background and your path to becoming an artist, you talked a lot about what drives your practice. But can you elaborate a little bit on how place is driving your work now, specifically New Orleans, and maybe some of the shifts that happened when you started to feel settled in a new place?
Yeah. my work starts from a very internal place. It starts from a very internal landscape, a sort of an internal question that I'm having, right? So like things that are going on with my family, maybe something I'm seeing that's going on, and I kind of go, oh, that's interesting. And then it may take a while for it to work itself out. So like the work that's being shown at the exhibition that you have going on, that actually started in 2015, but it didn't actually start to come out as a process until 2018. Because that was all about a very internal experience that I was having around about my home. I purchased a home in New Orleans, in Louisiana, my first home, and it was in the height of summer, and it was actually on the 10th anniversary of Katrina. So like height of hurricane season, just like the intent, and just sort of like this push of the southern wild sort of right there, which is something I had never experienced. And I thought that was interesting, but it was also the start of the presidential debates, like all of that. And that was new for me too. And so, looking at the landscape, right, this sort of mercurial bayou landscape that I'm now living in, and sort of looking at the politics that are going on around me, right? So like this environment is pushing, the heat is pushing, the landscape is pushing in on me. The politics were finding its way too, and it was pushing and it was pushing. And so I didn't want to have an outright conversation that was direct, that was representational about that push. I wanted to pose a question, and then I like for other people to pull on the threads from that question that gets posed. I find that way more interesting for me. With my work, I don't want to be so, it was more of like, hey, this is, how do people put memory on land, or how, and memory, right, itself is like sort of this thing that's ambiguous and it's changing and it's subjective. So how do we, who gets ownership of a land? Whose collective memory gets to have the rights to the land? And all while thinking about the politics of the South. So thinking about the southern landscape is just, it's so embedded with so much mythology and politics. You can't talk about the South and not talk about the land and land ownership. So my work starts from a very personal kind of place. And I sort of, I'll journal, I'll look at artists online, I'll do some research on things, and I just kind of let it settle. So I have a more slower methodical process than maybe some people. Some people are really like quick and can do it. Mine tends to take a little bit longer. And then hopefully in the end, it's this physical representation of this question that I was investigating, and then kind of posing it as, what do you think? What is your idea on this too?
I think that most people who have an art practice find that it is influenced from a lot of different directions. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really good to talk about how you can find inspiration internally and externally, and then where those things meet. So,
and it can be hard too, right? I think it's hard because that's being vulnerable, and that can be very difficult. Being vulnerable is it can be a very difficult thing, especially if you're really looking in when you're like, oh, like bring it out. It can be hard.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's why so much art doesn't get made, right? It's you let the fear of vulnerability and possibly rejection from the outside world prevent you from creating it. Yeah. And that's something I think that every maker struggles with, no matter the medium.
Absolutely.
So you find inspiration internally, and you see it externally, or in the life you're living. Are there any specific artists that have influenced you that do something similar that you admire, or that has influenced your work over the years?
I will tell the artists that I remember clinging to the most in my studies, and I still to this day find, I shoot square format. And I still like, so the work that's being shown during it's actually a little bit of a departure, because I'm typically a portrait photographer. But I love the challenge of like, how do you have a representation if there's nobody there to represent? So this more ambiguous. It was Deanne Arbus. So I really, to this day, I still really enjoy Deanne Arbus's work. She was a big influence early on in my, my starting my careers and my studies. Francesca Woodman as well. When I was living over in Italy, I looked at a lot of Francesca Woodman's work. I saw a lot of her work. And that was sort of the early. Now, now I find myself scrolling through Instagram and being like, oh, I really like, and saving somebody's work. Some of the work that I save that I think is interesting too is like stuff that I'm going to show my students. So a lot of Black photographers, a lot of Black artists. But I think, yeah, Deanne Arbus and Francesca Woodman would be the first two like that really, that stick out. If I can think of some more, I'll think. I know there's more, but it's always one of those things where I'm like, oh yeah, end. Yeah, end.
If you think of anyone else and you want us to add it to the notes in YouTube, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a great place to start. And I think a lot of photographers can identify with being inspired by those artists. And yeah. I think that speaking to students who are just being introduced to photography, those are great suggestions. So on that note, we're making these artists interviews for the students and the community, but we definitely want this to be these conversations to be a tool for the artists at LCC to start to think about their own work and how they want to incorporate art into their lives and how they want to develop their own practice. So as someone who's been doing this for a long time and has made a lot of life decisions to be able to continue making work, because I think that we have to actively find that time and prioritize our art making. Do you have any advice to offer to students who are maybe just beginning their path of being creatives, hopefully for years to come?
So yeah, I know that we're in a very specific time moment, right, with the pandemic going on. But one of the advices that I would give to students is eventually, when we're able to, you need to get out. You need to experience the world. It was a little bit easier for me because my family's from Italy, but go somewhere, go get out of your comfort zone and go learn to speak another language. Go have, especially while you're young, especially while you're in your 20s, go have a life experience, because before you know it, it'll be, marriage or kids or a house, and that you can't have it the same way. So go make those moments, because that'll help really influence your artwork as well. And just as a person too, I think it's really important. So
I completely agree. I mean, I've lived in almost every corner of the US at this point, and I've liked some places more than others, but despite maybe how I felt about living in certain places at the time, if I reflect back on it, I feel like I understand people who have different perspectives than I do much better. I feel like I'm more tolerant of people who don't agree with me, because I've known a lot of different types of people and I've experienced different cultures, and it brings nuance to life, which is something that you mentioned earlier about your work. Like, you want that nuance to be present, because life isn't just a hashtag, it's much more complicated than that. And so if we're sharing work, the way we're sharing work now on Instagram and websites and things like that, if the image is nuanced, it'll create a different experience for the viewers who are trying to understand the world around them. So
yeah, and I find that if you learn, like being an artist, it is another, and that's the other thing too, right? Not only is creativity a muscle, but art is another language. And so you've got to learn this other language, but then learning how to speak to other people, interacting with other people, you'll have a stronger understanding of your own visual language, and how to, and that's a struggle sometimes. I know it took me for a while to get there too. I was like, no, no, oh, no. Okay, yeah, no. I mean, I can tell you how many times I rewrite an artist statement, or I rewrite. It happened, that's part of it. But yeah, and sometimes it takes time.
So. Yeah, everyone makes bad art. You just doesn't mean you stop trying.
Yeah, that's a good one too. So that's the other thing. My students and my black and white photography classes, I'll tell them, in a roll of 36 images, you're lucky if you get one. And they're like, what? And I went, okay, don't be afraid to take a lot of really bad images. That's what I'm saying. It's a muscle memory. Just go out and photograph. It doesn't matter if it goes anywhere. It doesn't matter if anybody ever sees it.
Well, Eddie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I'm looking forward to sharing this interview with our students.
Yeah, good. I'm happy. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.